Today, we are deep diving into China's pivotal year, 2025. And it was a year defined by, well, a profound paradox for anyone with capital on the line. So let's just jump right in with a high-stakes question. Was 2025 the year the US-China trade war finally cooled off? Or was it the year a new geopolitical flashpoint, this time with Japan, just completely exploded?
The surprising and honestly stressful answer for investors is that it was both at the same time.
The ultimate contradiction.
Exactly. Our sources, and we're talking official policy reports, detailed economic analyses, confidential briefs, they all show a market getting whipsawed. You have trade relief on one hand and escalating military tension on the other.
And what's really incredible is that despite those tensions, a rare meeting led to tariffs dropping from, 125%?
Down to just 10% on some really crucial goods. It created this huge but very temporary window of opportunity.
So what does this duality mean for your decisions right now? Our mission in this deep dive is to break down the 10 most consequential events of 2025 in China.
Right. We're going to distill what each one means for your capital allocation, for your compliance risk, and for your strategic planning going into 2026.
The core insight we want you to walk away with is that 2025 marked a definitive shift.
It's a structural shift away from what we call scale pursuit, the old idea of just chasing market size, to something called selective opening.
Meaning you have to align with Beijing's national goals.
Or you risk getting left behind completely. Okay, let's unpack these events.
Let's start right where that paradox began. Event number 1, the Xi-Trump Busan meeting on October 30th. This was the first meeting of its kind in 6 years.
And the resulting trade agreement was monumental. Even with that short shelf life, the fascinating part was just the sheer speed of the tariff drops.
They plummeted.
They did.
Yeah.
From putative levels, sometimes over 125% down to a standard 10%. But, and this is the key, only for 1 year. It's set to expire in November 2026.
So that created this crucial sort of buffer space for supply chains. It gave global companies some breathing room.
The market signal was pretty clear. Manage decoupling.
Yeah.
A slow separation, not a rapid divorce.
But I have to push back on that a bit. Our sources suggest this was just a political pressure valve. Can investors really rely on a 1-year window when the real disagreements, especially in tech and semiconductors, are getting worse?
That is the critical distinction to make. The truce addressed trade friction, yeah, but it did absolutely nothing to resolve the core technology and security friction.
So if you mistook this for a permanent thaw,
you exposed yourself to massive long-term risk. The fundamental drive for tech self-reliance in China is still there, it's still accelerating.
Speaking of things accelerating, that brings us to event number 2. The huge shift in currency dynamics from September onwards. We saw the yuan appreciate and the dollar devalue.
Yep, the chain of events was pretty clear. The U.S. Federal Reserve cut rates 3 times last fall.
To stimulate the economy.
Right. And the dollar index fell over 10% as a result. That was enough pressure to push the yuan past that psychologically important 7.0 mark against the dollar.
And if you connect that to capital, it made yuan-denominated assets look a lot more attractive. We saw huge capital inflows, what they call northbound flows, through the Stock Connect schemes.
It just got cheaper for international money to buy Chinese stocks and bonds. But that same stability is a huge pain point for others.
For exporters.
Exactly. Chinese exporters felt immediate stress. Their dollar revenue just bought less back home. Suddenly, managing currency risk became mandatory for any CFO in a manufacturing hub. The financial engineering needed to profit just got a lot more complex.
And that complexity turned into a full-blown crisis with event number 3, the September military parade, and then that severe diplomatic crisis with Japan in December.
The parade itself was a strategic message. It marked the 80th anniversary of the War of Victory, and you had leaders from Russia and North Korea right there. It set a very firm tone.
But the real crisis for business came in December. It was triggered by a Japanese politician's comment about Taiwan.
And the economic retribution was immediate. And, you could argue, disproportionate. We saw 43% of all China-Japan flights canceled. That's over 500,000 tickets.
Wow.
Then a seafood import ban, cultural boycotts, and a huge 200-person Japanese business delegation had their trip canceled.
So this raises an urgent question for anyone managing the supply chain. Are you exposed to those Japan-China links?
You have to ask. because this showed a massive escalation risk. It's not just tourism. Think about strategic resources. Japan relies on China for 80% of its rare earth imports. This kind of geopolitical rug pull is a serious structural risk.
Okay, that covers the geopolitical whiplash. Let's shift to long-term policy, because China also provided a very clear roadmap. Event number 4, the recommendations for the 15th Five-Year Plan, the FYP, in October.
Right, and this document is basically the Bible for strategic alignment. It hammered 2 main themes: modernization of the industrial system and this new concept of new quality productive forces.
Okay, new quality productive forces. For an investor, what does that actually mean in plain English? Where should the money be going?
It means moving beyond old economy, plays like basic infrastructure or mass manufacturing. The sources are very clear on the strategic areas open to foreign investment. We're talking advanced manufacturing, green energy, digital tech, life sciences, and crucially, future industries.
Future industries like quantum, 6G.
Exactly. Quantum computing, 6G infrastructure, even things like brain-computer interface research.
It's a clear roadmap, but the challenge is still that emphasis on self-reliance. If Beijing wants to be self-reliant in quantum, why do they need foreign capital?
It's a good question. They need it for 2 reasons: specific best-in-class technologies that they don't have yet, and the management expertise to scale those industries fast. But the caveat is huge. Market access will be highly guided.
So if your sector touches data security or defense,
You'll face the tightest scrutiny. Success depends entirely on proving your technology is an asset to their national goals, not a liability.
Now, moving to domestic stability. Event number 5 was a big positive for predictability. The implementation of the Private Economy Promotion Law in May.
This was China's first dedicated national law to protect the private sector. It was a huge deal for legally asserting its long-term importance and, frankly, reducing the perception of that arbitrary regulatory risk we saw a few years ago.
And what's the actual mechanism here? How does it create fairer enforcement?
The key is that it's institutional. The law set up specific centralized bodies to handle commercial disputes between local authorities and private companies. It provides a clear avenue for appeal, which strengthens the rule of law around property rights.
Making it harder for local governments to just impose random barriers.
Precisely.
Okay, from internal stability to opening the doors on the periphery. Event number 6, the full island closure of the Hainan Free Trade Port in December.
This is a global story. It is now the world's largest free trade port and is fully operational. The key number for traders is the zero tariff goods expansion.
What did that look like?
It went from about 1,900 categories to 6,600. That's 74% coverage of all goods crossing that customs line.
Wait, 74% zero tariff coverage? If you're managing global logistics, what's the immediate tactical move that unlocks?
The immediate move is rerouting high-value components that were previously coming in through other ports. Hainan instantly became a premier gateway, saving huge tariff costs for anyone who can set up assembly or processing there.
Let's shift from policy to the market itself. Event number 7 was a huge confidence indicator. The Shanghai Composite Index breaking 4,000 in October.
Yeah, hitting 4,000 for the first time in a decade is a big headline. It reflects optimism, it attracts capital, but the takeaway here is it's nuanced.
I'm guessing it wasn't purely organic growth.
It wasn't. Our sources show this rally was partly policy engineered. We saw huge liquidity injections and direct policy levers designed to push domestic capital into equities. Its long-term health depends on real improvement in fundamentals, especially consumer spending.
And that weak consumer spending leads us right into event number 8. The fierce competition in the instant retail sector all through 2025.
This market is just massive. It's expected to exceed $1 trillion yuan in 2026. You have giants like Alibaba, Meituan, and JD in a zero-sum battle, integrating e-commerce, local services, delivery, all into one seamless system.
And the technological hunger that creates must be enormous. What does that mean for international B2B suppliers?
It creates huge immediate demand. We're talking next-gen AI scheduling, sophisticated cold chain tech, secure payment platforms. This domestic competition is like a pressure cooker for innovation, and global tech providers can capitalize by partnering with winners.
Now for the biggest global tech story, event number 9. AI competition sparking a supply chain and energy crisis, really kicking off from October.
The global AI frenzy. Nvidia's market cap passing $5 trillion as it all brought these immense structural challenges. We saw an acute shortage of high-bandwidth memory and storage chips, which drove up costs for data centers everywhere, from Shenzhen to Seattle.
And for China specifically, the U.S. export controls widened again. That limited access to the highest-end chips for training these massive AI models.
Which is a lose-lose in the short term. It slowed down some Chinese tech giants, but it also cut off a huge market for U.S. tech companies.
On top of that, you have the power demands.
Immense. We are now projecting global energy deficits because of this load, which will drive up electricity costs worldwide. But there is a silver lining. The success of local Chinese language models like DeepSeek offers huge partnership opportunities for industrial AI, like port automation, where collaboration is still allowed.
And finally, event number 10, a total outlier, but it signals a really important soft power shift. The animated film Ne Zha. The demon boy who annihilated the sea became the highest-grossing animated film globally.
This is so much more than a box office number. It's a proof point. It proved the international commercial viability of high-quality Chinese-originated intellectual property.
So it creates collaboration space for, say, international streaming platforms or Hollywood studios.
Exactly. And for IP investors in gaming and digital content, it's a huge signal.
Okay. After all that, these 10 contradictory events, let's try to synthesize this into a decision framework for 2026.
The overall assessment is that the environment is defined by opportunity and challenge existing right next to each other. So investors have to move from just chasing scale to a hyper-strategic selection.
And here are the key risks you have to hedge against. First, geopolitical volatility is not going away. That tariff truce doesn't stop the tech decoupling. That is accelerating. Second, regulatory compliance. It's skyrocketing. 70% of multinationals reported more compliance audits, especially on data security and ESG. You cannot be sloppy.
And third, maybe the most telling number. Actual foreign direct investment utilization dropped 10.3% in the first 10 months of 2025. The number of new companies went up, but the actual dollars being deployed went down. That shows real caution.
But the opportunity side, if you align with policy, is incredibly strong. FDI and high-tech manufacturing, medical devices, aerospace, it's all huge increases. Medical devices were up over 41%. That proves the selective opening is real.
And policy support is providing 5 to 10-year certainty. The private economy law, the 15th FYP. That's your roadmap. Plus, the yuan stability makes RMB-denominated assets pretty appealing in a volatile global environment.
So the actionable framework for your 2026 strategy meeting, what do? Increase allocation in high-tech manufacturing, green energy, medtech, and RMB assets.
And use that Hainan free trade port as a strategic hub. Conversely, you have to reduce or avoid purely speculative short-term trading, single-country concentration, and critically, any company that's heavily dependent on that newly strained Japan supply chain.
So 2025 gave us a temporary trade truce, but a permanent structural shift toward high-quality growth and tech self-reliance.
It gave you a buffer, but it demanded alignment. Which brings us to the final question you need to be asking. If that temporary U.S.-China tariff deal expires in November 2026, and the 15th five-year plan requires accelerated technology autonomy, will foreign investors have successfully aligned with China's strategic industries? Or will the nation's push for self-reliance have made their traditional business models entirely redundant? That's the question for your 2026 strategy meeting.